America carried power or meaning, the land itself breathed quietly beneath open skies. Rivers moved patiently toward the sea, forests stood unbroken, and generations of Native American nations lived in balance with the rhythms of nature. They farmed, hunted, traded, governed, and passed down wisdom through stories rather than written law. Time moved slowly, guided by seasons rather than ambition. This calm world began to change at the edge of the 16th century, when distant sails appeared on the horizon. Europeans, driven by hunger for land, wealth, and religious freedom, crossed the Atlantic Ocean toward uncertainty. They did not arrive as conquerors at first, but as fragile travelers stepping into a world far older than their own ambitions. In 1607, a small group of English settlers founded Jamestown along the banks of the James River. It was not a grand beginning. The settlement struggled from the very first days. Food was scarce, diseases spread quickly, and the unfamiliar land resisted their presence. Many did not survive the first winters. Yet those who remained clung to hope, believing that endurance itself could shape a future. Jamestown was more than a settlement. It was a quiet experiment. It tested whether people could leave behind rigid European hierarchies and build something new. Survival required cooperation. Decisions were made not by kings, but by necessity. Slowly, a different way of life began to take form. As the years passed, more settlers arrived. Some came seeking profit, others escaping religious persecution. Pilgrims settled in Plymouth in 1620, carrying with them a belief that faith and community should guide society. Unlike the rigid class systems of Europe, these colonies relied on shared labor and local decision-making. The idea that ordinary people could govern their own lives began to take root. By the early 18th century, 13 British colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast. Each colony had its own character, shaped by geography, culture, and belief. Farmers worked the land in the south, merchants traded in northern ports, and craftsmen built towns that slowly grew into cities. Though separated by distance, the colonies shared one common experience. They were far from the power that ruled them. Britain governed from across the ocean. Laws arrived by ship, often months late, carrying commands from people who had never seen the land they controlled. At first, this distance allowed the colonies freedom in practice, if not in law. Local assemblies formed. Town meetings became places where voices mattered. Without realizing it, the colonists were learning self-rule. This quiet independence did not last. After costly wars in Europe, Britain turned toward its colonies to recover losses. Taxes increased, trade was restricted. Everyday goods, paper, tea, sugar, became symbols of control. For the first time, colonists felt the weight of distant authority pressing into their daily lives. What troubled them most was not taxation itself, but exclusion. They paid into a system in which they had no voice. Decisions were made without consent. Slowly, a belief hardened into conviction. Authority without representation was injustice. The phrase, "no taxation without representation," spread through taverns, newspapers, and town squares. It was more than a slogan, it was a declaration of dignity. It expressed the belief that people were not subjects by default, but participants in their own governance. Resistance at first was quiet and measured. Petitions were written, boycotts organized. Colonists hoped reason might prevail. But as Britain tightened control, patience wore thin, trust dissolved. The space between ruler and ruled grew wider. By the early 1770s, the colonies stood at a crossroads. They were still British in law, yet no longer British in spirit. A shared identity was forming, one built not on bloodline or crown, but on common experience and belief. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. In this moment of tension and uncertainty, America had not yet risen. There was no nation, no flag, no promise of power. There was only an idea, quiet, fragile, and dangerous, that people could choose their own future. That idea would soon be tested by conflict, sacrifice, and time. And so the story pauses here, at the edge of transformation. A world balanced between obedience and rebellion, between fear and hope, between what had always been and what had never existed before. The rise of America had not yet begun in war or triumph, but in thought. And thought, once awakened, rarely returns to sleep. The idea that had begun to awaken in the colonies did not yet demand rebellion. At first, it asked only to be heard. Life continued, fields were tilled, ships arrived in harbors, and towns slowly grew. But beneath the ordinary rhythm, unease settled quietly into daily thought. The colonies were changing in ways Britain did not fully understand. Distance had shaped them into something new. Generations had been born on American soil, people who had never seen England and felt no emotional tie to its crown. Their loyalty was not inherited, it was conditional. Local assemblies became centers of discussion and debate. In town halls and meeting houses, ordinary citizens gathered to decide matters affecting their communities. These meetings were modest, sometimes messy, but they carried a powerful lesson. Voices mattered. Decisions could be shared. Authority could be questioned. Print culture strengthened this awakening. Newspapers and pamphlets spread ideas faster than ships could carry orders from London. Writers argued that freedom was not a gift from rulers, but a natural condition of being human. One pamphlet, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, would soon speak with unusual clarity, but the ground was already prepared. Meanwhile, Britain viewed the colonies less as communities and more as assets. Laws such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts placed taxes on everyday items. Officially, these measures were meant to fund defense. In reality, they felt like reminders of subordination. Resistance grew more organized. Merchants refused British goods. Citizens agreed to personal sacrifice in the name of principle. Women, often overlooked in formal history, played a crucial role by producing cloth and supplies locally, weakening dependence on imports. British soldiers began appearing in colonial cities, particularly Boston. Their presence was meant to enforce order, but instead it fueled resentment. The sight of armed troops among civilians blurred the line between protection and occupation. In 1770, tension erupted into tragedy during the Boston Massacre. A confrontation between soldiers and citizens ended in gunfire. 5 colonists lay dead. Though the event was small in scale, its impact was enormous. It transformed fear into anger, and anger into resolve. Still, many colonists hoped reconciliation was possible. They did not yet dream of independence. They asked only for fairness, representation, and respect. Petitions were sent to the king. Appeals were made in measured language. But responses from Britain grew colder. Authority hardened. Compromise faded. The colonies felt unheard, dismissed, and increasingly cornered. In 1773, resistance took a dramatic form. Disguised colonists boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped chests of tea into the water. The Boston Tea Party was not an act of chaos, it was symbolic defiance. It said that obedience without consent had limits. Britain answered swiftly and harshly. Boston's port was closed. Local government powers were stripped away. These measures, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, were meant to isolate Massachusetts. Instead, they unified the colonies. For the first time, colonial leaders met together in the First Continental Congress. They were no longer isolated communities, they were a collective. Discussion shifted from complaint to preparation. Militias quietly organized, weapons were gathered. Trust in peaceful resolution weakened with each passing month. The idea that had once whispered now spoke with urgency. Yet uncertainty remained. To rebel against the British Empire was unthinkable to many. Fear walked beside conviction. Families were divided. Neighbors disagreed. The future felt heavy with consequence. The land itself seemed to sense the approaching storm. Roads carried messages. Churches carried warnings. Silence before conflict settled like dusk. By early 1775, the colonies stood on the edge of transformation. They had not chosen war, but war was choosing them. What had begun as a desire for dignity was becoming a readiness for sacrifice. The rise of America was no longer an abstract thought. It was becoming a path, narrow, uncertain, and irreversible. And soon, the first shots would echo through history, turning belief into action. But for now, the nation still existed only in the minds of those brave enough to imagine it. The year 1775 arrived quietly, yet it carried the weight of inevitability. The colonies still spoke the language of peace, but their actions revealed preparation. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Riders carried messages along narrow roads. Ordinary life continued, but with a careful watchfulness, as if the land itself were listening. British authorities sensed the change. Orders were given to disarm the colonial militias and restore control before resistance could fully organize. One such order set events into motion. An instruction to seize weapons stored in the town of Concord, near Boston. On an early April morning, British troops marched out of Boston toward Lexington and Concord. They expected compliance. Instead, they found quiet defiance. In Lexington, colonial militia stood waiting. No one knows who fired the first shot. History remembers it simply as the shot heard round the world. That single moment shattered hesitation. Gunfire echoed across fields and villages. When the British retreated, they did not march back in order. They fled under relentless resistance. Farmers, craftsmen, and townspeople fired from behind trees and stone walls. The myth of British invincibility dissolved. War had begun. News spread rapidly. What happened near Boston was no longer a local clash. It was a signal. Militias formed across the colonies. Men left farms and workshops to take up arms, uncertain if they would return. There were no uniforms, no professional armies, only belief and urgency. The Second Continental Congress convened soon after. Its members faced a grave decision. They were now directing a rebellion, whether they admitted it or not. They appointed George Washington as commander of the Continental Army, not because he promised victory, but because he embodied discipline, patience, and unity. Washington arrived at the camps outside Boston to find chaos. Supplies were scarce, training was minimal, morale wavered. Yet slowly, through persistence rather than brilliance, an army began to take shape. The early years of the war were uncertain. The British held major cities. The Continental Army lost battles as often as it won. Winter brought hunger and despair. At Valley Forge, soldiers endured freezing conditions, poor clothing, and limited food. Many questioned whether the cause was worth such suffering. What sustained them was not comfort, but conviction. They believed the struggle was larger than any single battle. It was about dignity, self-rule, and the right to shape one's own destiny. In 1776, while war raged, the colonies took a step that could not be undone. Leaders gathered to give voice to what had long been felt. The Declaration of Independence was drafted, not as a legal document alone, but as a moral statement to the world. It declared that all people are born equal, that rights are inherent, not granted by rulers, that governments exist to protect liberty and lose legitimacy when they fail to do so. By signing it, the delegates placed their lives at risk. They were no longer protesters, they were revolutionaries. The war stretched on. Victory did not come quickly, but the tide slowly shifted. Foreign powers, especially France, saw opportunity in Britain's struggle and offered support. Supplies arrived, confidence grew. In 1781, the decisive moment came at Yorktown. British forces were surrounded, cut off and exhausted. They surrendered. Though fighting continued briefly elsewhere, the outcome was clear. In 1783, Britain formally recognized American independence. The war was over. But peace brought its own uncertainty. The colonies were now states, free but fragile. They had won independence, yet unity remained untested. There was no king, no clear structure, no certainty that the experiment would survive. The arise of America had passed through fire, but it had not yet learned how to stand. What came next would determine whether freedom could endure beyond victory. And so, as the echoes of war faded, a deeper challenge began. Not how to fight for independence, but how to govern it. The story moved from battlefield to blueprint, from survival to vision, and the future waited, unwritten. When the war ended, silence replaced the sound of gunfire. The fields where battles had been fought returned to stillness, but the minds of the people remained restless. Victory had secured independence, yet it offered no clear instructions for what came next. Freedom had been won, but freedom alone could not govern a nation. The former colonies now called themselves states, 13 separate entities bound together by shared sacrifice, but divided by interests, geography, and fear. They were wary of centralized power, having just escaped an empire that ruled from afar. The question that hovered over every discussion was simple, yet immense. How could they govern without becoming what they had just overthrown? At first, the answer was cautious. The states agreed to unite under a loose arrangement known as the Articles of Confederation. This system created a national government with limited authority. It could declare war and manage foreign affairs, but it could not tax, enforce laws, or regulate trade effectively. In theory, this protected liberty. In practice, it revealed weakness. Economic problems quickly surfaced. War debts weighed heavily on the states. Trade disputes arose between neighbors. Without a strong central authority, laws varied wildly, and cooperation depended more on goodwill than obligation. The fragility of the system became clear during Shays' Rebellion in 1786, when farmers in Massachusetts, burdened by debt and taxes, rose in armed protest. The national government lacked the power to respond decisively. For many leaders, this moment was a warning, not of rebellion itself, but of disorder. Slowly, opinion shifted. Liberty required structure. Independence demanded responsibility. In 1787, delegates from the states gathered in Philadelphia. Officially, their task was to revise the Articles of Confederation. Unofficially, they knew something bolder was needed. Behind closed doors, they began designing an entirely new framework of government. The debates were intense. Large states argued for representation based on population. Smaller states feared being overshadowed. Some wanted a strong executive, others feared another king. Compromise became the language of survival. From these debates emerged a careful balance. Power would be divided into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, each limiting the others. Authority would flow from the people, not from birthright. Law would stand above individuals. This document became known as the United States Constitution. It was not perfect. It reflected the limitations and contradictions of its time. Yet it carried a radical idea that a nation could be built on written principles, revised through reason rather than revolution. Ratification was not automatic. Citizens argued fiercely in newspapers and town halls. Some feared the new government was too strong. Others believed it was the only path to stability. To ease concern, a promise was made to add protections for individual liberty. These protections became the Bill of Rights, guaranteeing freedoms of speech, religion, and due process. With these assurances, the Constitution was accepted. In 1789, George Washington was elected the first President of the United States. His leadership set an example of restraint. Power, he showed, could be held without being clung to. When his terms ended, he stepped aside, reinforcing the principle that authority was temporary. The new nation began cautiously. Laws were tested, institutions formed, mistakes were made and corrected. The experiment of self-government moved from theory into daily life. America was no longer merely independent, it was becoming a functioning republic. The rise of America had entered a new phase. No longer defined by rebellion, it was now defined by responsibility. What lay ahead would test whether ideals written on paper could survive the pressures of expansion, ambition, and human imperfection. The foundation had been laid, and upon it, a nation would begin to grow. As the new republic found its footing, the pace of life remained measured, yet beneath the calm surface, powerful forces were beginning to move. The United States was still young, still uncertain, but it carried within it an energy shaped by opportunity and ambition. The government established under the Constitution began its quiet work. Courts interpreted laws. Congress debated policy. The presidency evolved carefully, shaped as much by what was avoided as by what was done. Leaders understood that every decision set precedent, not only for their time, but for generations to come. Beyond the halls of government, the nation looked outward. Land stretched endlessly to the west, rivers, forests, plains, and mountains that promised space and possibility. For many Americans, the future lay not in established cities, but in the unknown frontier. This belief gradually formed into an idea later called manifest destiny, the conviction that expansion across the continent was both inevitable and justified. Settlers moved westward in wagons, carrying little more than tools, faith, and endurance. New towns appeared almost overnight, fragile but determined. Expansion brought growth, but it also carried conflict. Native American nations stood in the path of settlement. Their lands, increasingly claimed by treaties signed under pressure, were ignored altogether. Removal policies forced entire communities to leave ancestral homes. The Trail of Tears marked one of the darkest chapters in the nation's early growth, a reminder that progress for some often meant suffering for others. At the same time, regional differences deepened. The North moved steadily toward industry and manufacturing. The South remained largely agricultural, its economy dependent on enslaved labor. Two ways of life grew apart, bound together by law but divided by belief. Slavery, unresolved at the nation's founding, became an ever-present tension. Compromises were made to maintain balance between free and slave states, but each agreement only postponed confrontation. The nation expanded geographically, yet fractured morally. Despite these divisions, innovation flourished. Canals connected regions, roads improved communication, steam power transformed travel and trade. Immigration surged, bringing new languages, customs, and skills. Cities grew louder, faster, and more complex. The American identity continued to evolve. It was no longer defined solely by resistance to monarchy, but by movement, invention, and self-reinvention. The belief that one could leave the past behind and begin again became central to the national character. Yet this belief came with consequences. Land was claimed, cultures were displaced, and inequality deepened. Freedom existed unevenly, promised in principle, but denied in practice to many. As the 19th century progressed, the question grew unavoidable. Could a nation founded on liberty continue to expand while denying freedom to millions? Political debate sharpened. Voices rose in opposition to slavery, calling it incompatible with the nation's ideals. Others defended it as essential to economic survival. Compromise grew fragile. Patience thinned. By the mid-1800s, the United States stood larger, wealthier, and more powerful, but also more divided than ever before. The rise of America, once driven by unity against an external power, now faced its greatest test from within. The land had been claimed. The institutions had been built. What remained uncertain was whether the nation could remain whole. The calm before the coming storm settled across the country, and history moved slowly, but inevitably, toward conflict. As the nation moved deeper into the 19th century, the tension that had long lingered beneath its growth could no longer be softened by compromise. The United States had expanded across vast lands, but its ideals had not expanded equally. The contradiction between liberty and slavery stood unresolved, heavy and unavoidable. New territories entered the Union one by one, each raising the same question: would they be free or slave? Every decision shifted the balance of power. Every debate reopened old wounds. Political arguments, once spoken quietly, now filled public halls, newspapers, and streets. The voices against slavery grew stronger. Abolitionists spoke with moral clarity, insisting that freedom could not coexist with human bondage. Their words traveled through sermons, pamphlets, and speeches, stirring conscience and resistance. Others, equally determined, defended slavery as tradition, economy, and necessity. The nation's political system strained under the weight of division. Laws meant to preserve unity instead deepened mistrust. The Compromise of 1850 delayed conflict but did not resolve it. The Kansas-Nebraska Act turned territories into battlegrounds where neighbors turned against neighbors over the future of freedom. Fear replaced patience. Suspicion replaced dialogue. In 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln marked a turning point. He promised to prevent the spread of slavery, not to abolish it outright. But for many in the South, even this restraint felt like a threat. Trust collapsed. One by one, Southern states chose secession. They believed departure was the only way to preserve their way of life. In response, the nation fractured, not quietly, but decisively. In 1861, war began. The American Civil War was unlike any conflict the nation had known. It was not fought against a distant empire, but against itself. Families divided, communities shattered. The battlefield stretched across towns, rivers, and fields once shared in peace. The early years were marked by confusion and loss. Neither side fully grasped the scale of sacrifice ahead. Battles ended without resolution. Casualties mounted. Hope wavered. President Lincoln spoke carefully, often somberly. He framed the war not only as a fight to preserve the Union, but as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty could endure. His words carried weight beyond strategy. They carried purpose. As the war dragged on, its meaning changed. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring freedom for enslaved people in rebelling states. The war became more than a struggle for unity. It became a moral reckoning. Enslaved men and women fled plantations, crossing uncertain ground toward freedom. African American soldiers joined the Union Army, fighting for a nation that had not yet fully accepted them. The conflict grew longer and bloodier. Fields, once quiet, became marked with loss. Towns mourned. The cost of division became unmistakable. Yet through exhaustion and grief, the idea that had founded the nation endured. That idea, that freedom must be defended even at great cost, guided the final years of war. In 1865, the fighting ended. The Union was preserved. Slavery was abolished. The nation stood victorious, but wounded. The arise of America had passed through its darkest trial. The question was no longer whether the country could expand or govern, but whether it could heal. Silence returned once more, and in that silence, the long work of rebuilding began. When the Civil War ended, the nation exhaled slowly, as if awakening from a long and painful dream. The sound of cannons faded, but their echo lingered in broken towns, empty fields, and grieving homes. Victory had preserved the Union, yet peace revealed how fragile unity truly was. The years that followed were known as Reconstruction, a period not of celebration, but of uncertainty. The South lay devastated. Railroads were destroyed, cities damaged, and economies collapsed. Millions of formerly enslaved people stood free in law, but vulnerable in reality, facing a world that had not yet learned how to accept their freedom. The federal government sought to rebuild and redefine the nation. Constitutional amendments abolished slavery, granted citizenship, and promised equal protection under the law. On paper, these changes were revolutionary. In practice, they faced fierce resistance. Former Confederate states rejoined the Union under conditions meant to ensure loyalty and reform. New governments formed. For a brief moment, the promise of a more inclusive democracy seemed possible. African Americans voted, held office, and participated openly in public life. But progress was uneven and fragile. Opposition hardened quietly, then openly. Groups formed to restore old hierarchies through fear and violence. Laws were written to restrict rights without naming race directly. Freedom existed, but it was tightly constrained. As national attention shifted elsewhere, federal commitment weakened. Reconstruction ended not with resolution, but with withdrawal. The nation moved forward, leaving unresolved wounds behind. At the same time, America entered an age of astonishing growth. Factories rose where farms once stood. Steel, coal, and oil powered industry. Cities expanded upward and outward, drawing millions of workers into crowded streets filled with noise and promise. Immigration surged. People arrived from Europe, Asia, and beyond, carrying hope and hardship in equal measure. They labored in mills, railways, and mines, building the physical foundations of modern America. Their presence reshaped culture, language, and identity. Innovation accelerated daily life. Electricity lit streets. Telegraphs carried messages across vast distances. Trains compressed time and space. The nation felt faster, louder, and more restless than ever before. Wealth accumulated rapidly, but unevenly. A small number of industrialists amassed great fortunes, while many workers endured long hours and dangerous conditions. The contrast between prosperity and poverty grew stark. Voices rose in response. Labor movements organized strikes and demanded fair wages, safety, and dignity. Reformers spoke against child labor and corruption. The idea that freedom also required fairness began to take shape. America's power expanded beyond its borders. The nation looked outward, asserting influence through trade and conflict. The Spanish-American War marked a shift from continental expansion to global presence. By the turn of the 20th century, the United States stood transformed. It was no longer a fragile republic recovering from civil war. It was an industrial force, diverse and divided, confident yet uneasy. The rise of America had entered a new chapter, one driven not by survival, but by momentum. The nation moved forward, carried by invention and ambition, even as unanswered questions followed close behind. History did not pause. It gathered speed. As the 20th century approached, the United States stood at a threshold. The nation had grown powerful in industry and population, yet its identity was still forming. Beneath the clatter of factories and the glow of electric lights, Americans began to question what progress truly meant. Cities expanded rapidly. Skyscrapers rose where open land once stretched. Streets filled with immigrants speaking dozens of languages, each carrying memories of distant homes. Opportunity was real, but so were hardship and overcrowding. Life moved faster than ever before. In response, a quiet reform movement took shape. Known later as the Progressive Era, it sought not to overturn the system, but to correct its excesses. Journalists exposed corruption. Reformers pushed for safer working conditions, cleaner cities, and fairer laws. The belief grew that government could be a tool for public good, not only for control. Education expanded. Public schools multiplied. Universities grew into centers of research and debate. Knowledge became a form of power, shaping a more informed and engaged society. At the same time, America's presence on the world stage increased. The nation began to see itself not just as a land of refuge, but as a rising influence. Trade routes extended overseas. Naval strength expanded. The country's gaze turned outward. In 1917, global conflict pulled America fully into international affairs. World War I demanded sacrifice, coordination, and unity. Though the nation entered late, its industrial capacity proved decisive. When the war ended, the United States emerged economically strengthened, but emotionally cautious. The 1920s brought contrast. Prosperity returned. Jazz filled the air. New technologies, radio, automobiles, cinema, reshaped daily life. The nation celebrated speed, style, and possibility. Yet beneath the surface, imbalance grew. Speculation replaced stability. Wealth concentrated at the top. Warnings went unheeded. In 1929, the illusion shattered. The Great Depression descended suddenly and deeply. Banks failed, jobs vanished, families lost homes and hope. Lines formed not for opportunity, but for bread. The crisis tested the nation's resilience. Old assumptions no longer held. In response, the government expanded its role through the New Deal, offering relief, reform, and recovery. Programs provided work, support, and a renewed sense of collective responsibility. The idea of American strength began to shift from pure self-reliance toward shared effort. The nation learned that survival could require cooperation. As the economy slowly recovered, another storm gathered abroad. In Europe and Asia, conflict returned. The United States hesitated, shaped by memory of past war, but history moved forward regardless. By the late 1930s, neutrality grew fragile. Events beyond American shores would soon demand response. The rise of America, once driven by expansion and industry, was entering a phase defined by global consequence. The nation stood again at the edge of transformation, quietly preparing, waiting for the moment when choice would become necessity. The moment arrived quietly, yet its impact would be felt across the world. In December 1941, the United States was drawn into a conflict it could no longer avoid. The attack on Pearl Harbor shattered hesitation and transformed uncertainty into resolve. America entered World War II not only as a nation at war, but as a society mobilized. Factories shifted overnight from civilian goods to military production. Assembly lines moved with relentless precision. Men and women answered calls to serve, each in their own way. The war demanded unity on a scale never before experienced. Communities reorganized daily life around rationing, conservation, and sacrifice. Ordinary routines became acts of contribution. Victory depended not just on soldiers abroad, but on workers at home. The conflict reshaped American identity. Women entered industrial labor in unprecedented numbers, altering expectations and expanding possibility. Minority communities sought opportunity and recognition, even as discrimination persisted. Change moved forward unevenly, but decisively. On distant battlefields, American forces fought alongside allies across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The war tested endurance, strategy, and morale. Losses were heavy. The cost was profound. In 1945, the war ended. The destruction left behind was vast, but the United States emerged with its industrial base intact and its influence expanded. The nation had not only participated in victory, it had helped define it. Peace, however, did not bring simplicity. The world stood divided, shaped by ideology and power. Almost immediately, a new tension replaced open conflict. The Cold War began. America found itself positioned as a leader in a fragile global order. Through the Marshall Plan, it helped rebuild war-torn Europe, believing stability was the foundation of peace. Institutions like the United Nations reflected a hope, measured, cautious, that cooperation might prevent future catastrophe. At home, prosperity returned. Suburbs expanded. Education grew through initiatives like the GI Bill. Science and technology advanced rapidly, fueled by both curiosity and competition. Yet fear traveled alongside progress. Nuclear weapons introduced the possibility of destruction beyond imagination. The balance of power depended on restraint. Tension became a constant presence, quiet but unrelenting. American culture reached outward. Music, film, and ideas crossed borders, shaping global imagination. Influence spread not only through policy, but through story. The rise of America had entered its most complex phase, power paired with responsibility, leadership shadowed by consequence. The nation stood at the center of a world still healing, still dividing, still searching for stability. History did not slow. It demanded vigilance. And America moved forward, aware now that its choices echoed far beyond its own borders. The post-war years unfolded with a quiet confidence. America stood largely untouched by the physical destruction that had scarred much of the world. Its factories remained active, its cities intact, its population hopeful. The nation entered an era of prosperity shaped by memory, ambition, and caution. Families moved outward from crowded cities into newly built suburbs. Homes lined fresh streets. Lawns were trimmed carefully. Daily life settled into patterns of work, school, and shared routine. Stability became a national aspiration. Television entered living rooms, carrying shared stories into millions of homes at once. News, entertainment, and advertising blended into a common cultural rhythm. For the first time, the nation watched itself together. Yet beneath this calm surface, tension stirred. The Cold War deepened. Ideological rivalry shaped foreign and domestic policy alike. Fear of communism spread quietly, then loudly, influencing careers, art, and personal lives. Internationally, the United States positioned itself as a defender of influence and containment. Conflicts unfolded far from American soil, yet felt deeply at home. The Korean War marked the beginning of a new kind of engagement, limited war under constant global pressure. At home, voices began to rise. African Americans challenged segregation through courage and persistence. The civil rights movement grew steadily, shaped by marches, speeches, and acts of quiet defiance. Equality was no longer an abstract promise, it became a demand. Landmark decisions and legislation reshaped the nation's moral landscape. Progress was slow and often resisted, but direction mattered. Change moved forward one step at a time. Science carried America beyond Earth itself. The space race transformed imagination into urgency. Rockets lifted human ambition skyward, fueled by competition and curiosity. In 1969, the nation watched as astronauts walked on the moon, an achievement born of rivalry, discipline, and shared wonder. The 1960s and 1970s brought reflection as well as unrest. Protests questioned authority. The Vietnam War strained trust between government and citizens. Confidence wavered. Yet resilience endured. Institutions adapted. Conversations deepened. The nation learned again that growth was not only measured in power, but in understanding. By the late 20th century, America stood changed, still influential, still contested, still evolving. Its rise had never been a straight line. It was a rhythm of hope and doubt, movement and pause, and the story continued. As the 20th century moved forward, America entered a period defined by transition rather than certainty. The confident rhythms of post-war life softened, replaced by questions about identity, responsibility, and direction. Economic growth slowed in the 1970s. Energy crises revealed vulnerability. Long lines formed at gas stations. Inflation unsettled households. The idea that prosperity was guaranteed began to fade. At the same time, society continued to change. The gains of the civil rights movement reshaped law and culture, even as inequality persisted. Women pressed for expanded rights and recognition. Voices once pushed aside now demanded space in public life. Technology quietly transformed daily routines. Computers entered offices and schools. Information began to move faster than people. The seeds of a digital future were being planted, unnoticed by many. Internationally, the Cold War shifted tone. Diplomacy alternated with confrontation. Proxy conflicts flared and cooled. The threat of nuclear confrontation remained, steady and unseen. In the 1980s, a renewed sense of confidence emerged. Economic policies emphasized markets and competition. Innovation accelerated. Corporate power expanded. Wealth grew, but unevenly. America's global image sharpened. Military strength increased. Cultural influence spread through music, film, and television. The nation projected assurance even as internal divisions remained. Then, quietly and unexpectedly, the global balance shifted. In 1991, the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union dissolved without a final battlefield. A decades-long tension released itself, not with explosion, but with collapse. America stood momentarily alone at the center of world power. The future seemed open, undefined, and full of promise. The 1990s unfolded with optimism. The internet connected people across continents, markets expanded, innovation flourished, the pace of life accelerated again. Yet beneath the surface, new challenges gathered. Globalization blurred borders, prosperity spread unevenly, questions of security, identity, and purpose returned in new forms. The rise of America had reached an unfamiliar stage, not forged by war or survival, but by influence and complexity. The nation moved forward into a world it helped shape, a world faster, smaller, and more connected than ever before. History continued, not as a march, but as a conversation, and America listened, uncertain of the answers, yet aware that the story was far from finished. The new century arrived without ceremony, yet it carried the weight of expectation. Technology had accelerated life, and America moved with it, confident, connected, and increasingly visible on the world stage. The pace felt unstoppable. Then, in September 2001, a single morning altered the national rhythm. The attacks of September 11th shocked the nation into stillness. Skies emptied, streets quieted. Grief and disbelief spread across cities and small towns alike. In the aftermath, unity returned, briefly, intense and emotional. Flags appeared in windows. Strangers spoke gently to one another. The nation searched for meaning amid loss. Policy followed pain. America entered a new era defined by security and vigilance. Wars began far from home, reshaping foreign policy and domestic life. The language of safety became permanent, woven into airports, public spaces, and daily thought. At home, technology continued to advance. The internet transformed from novelty to necessity. Social media reshaped communication, identity, and politics. Voices multiplied. Information flowed freely and chaotically. The economy surged, then faltered. In 2008, financial systems collapsed under their own weight. Jobs vanished. Homes were lost. Confidence wavered once more. Government intervened to stabilize the crisis. Recovery came slowly, unevenly. The experience left lasting questions about markets, fairness, and responsibility. Culturally, America grew more diverse, more vocal, and more divided. Debates over equality, justice, and belonging intensified. The nation argued with itself, publicly and constantly. Yet resilience persisted, innovation continued, new industries emerged, creativity flourished in unexpected places. America's rise no longer followed a clear upward path. It moved in waves, progress and setback, unity and fracture. The nation entered the modern era not as a finished power, but as a work in progress, still shaping itself, still questioning, still moving forward. History did not conclude. It adapted, and America adapted with it. As the second decade of the new century unfolded, America moved through a period of reflection and tension. The nation was more connected than ever before, yet often felt fragmented. Conversations that once happened quietly now echoed across digital spaces, amplified and persistent.
Technology reshaped how people saw the world and how they saw one another. News arrived instantly. Opinions traveled faster than facts. Public life became continuous, leaving little room for pause. The speed of information altered the rhythm of democracy itself. Economic recovery continued, though unevenly. Some regions flourished while others struggled. Opportunity remained abundant for some, distant for others. The question of fairness returned again and again, shaping debate and policy. America's demographic landscape continued to evolve. New generations grew up in a nation more diverse in language, culture, and belief than any before it. Identity became central to public dialogue, both as a source of strength and division. Globally, the United States adjusted to a world no longer defined by a single dominant power. Competition intensified, alliances shifted, leadership required negotiation rather than certainty. Influence was still strong, but no longer unquestioned. Moments of crisis tested the nation's capacity for unity. Natural disasters revealed both vulnerability and generosity. Communities responded with resilience, reminding the country of its shared foundations. Social movements rose with renewed urgency, calling attention to justice, representation, and accountability. Protests filled streets not as interruptions to history, but as expressions of it. Change pressed forward through voices long unheard. At the same time, fatigue settled in. The constant presence of conflict, political, cultural, digital, left many searching for calm. Reflection became necessary, even difficult. The idea of American strength shifted once more. It was no longer measured solely by economy or military reach, but by adaptability, by the ability to listen, revise, and endure. The rise of America, now centuries in motion, revealed itself as a living process rather than a completed achievement. The nation paused at intervals, not to stop, but to reconsider, to adjust its course, to remember its ideals. History remained open, and America continued forward, shaped as much by its questions as by its answers.
As the years continued, America entered a season of reckoning. The past, long carried quietly beneath progress, began to speak more clearly. Stories once overlooked surfaced with new urgency, asking the nation to listen. History was no longer distant. It appeared in conversations about justice, memory, and responsibility. Monuments were questioned. Narratives were re-examined. The country began to understand that its rise had been shaped not only by triumph, but also by exclusion and struggle. Public dialogue grew intense. Disagreement filled news cycles and online spaces. Yet beneath the noise lay a deeper process, a society learning how to confront its own reflection. Growth, once again, required discomfort. Technology continued to accelerate daily life. Artificial intelligence, automation, and digital platforms reshaped work and communication. Efficiency increased, but uncertainty followed. Many wondered what progress would demand next. Global challenges ignored borders. Climate change revealed itself through stronger storms, rising seas, and shifting seasons. The nation faced a truth it could not solve alone. Leadership now required cooperation beyond rivalry. Moments of crisis reminded Americans of their shared vulnerability. In these moments, communities often responded not with division, but with care. Neighbors helped neighbors. Small acts carried quiet power. The meaning of freedom evolved again. It was no longer only about independence from rule, but about access to health, safety, opportunity, and dignity. The conversation widened. America's role in the world remained influential, yet increasingly complex. Power was balanced by accountability. Decisions carried consequences felt far beyond national borders. The rise of America, viewed from this moment, appeared less like a climb and more like a long journey, marked by detours, pauses, and renewed direction. The nation did not stand finished. It stood learning, listening, adapting. History flowed onward, patient and unhurried. And America moved with it, not toward a final destination, but toward deeper understanding. The story continued, open, unfinished, and still being written. Time continued its steady movement, and America entered another chapter shaped by endurance. The nation had learned, again and again, that its strength did not lie in perfection, but in response, how it met challenge, uncertainty, and change. Daily life carried both familiarity and flux. Traditions remained, yet routines shifted. Work, education, and communication blended into digital spaces, dissolving the boundaries that once structured time. The pace could feel relentless, yet within it people searched for balance. Generations overlapped, each carrying a different memory of the nation. Older voices remembered long struggles for rights and recognition. Younger voices imagined futures not yet defined. Together, they shaped a dialogue that stretched across decades. Economic patterns continued to evolve. Innovation created new opportunities while disrupting old ones. Prosperity appeared in new forms, yet insecurity followed closely behind. The nation debated how to measure success, not only in growth but in well-being. Across cities and countryside alike, Americans responded to moments of difficulty with quiet resolve. Mutual aid, volunteerism, and shared effort surfaced repeatedly, often beyond headlines. These moments reminded the nation of its deeper foundations. Culture reflected complexity. Art, music, and storytelling explored identity, history, and hope. Creativity became a way to process uncertainty, offering space for reflection rather than resolution. Globally, America navigated a world shaped by interdependence. Challenges such as health, climate, and technology crossed borders easily. Leadership required cooperation as much as confidence. The idea of the American dream evolved once more. It no longer promised a single path, but many, diverse, personal, and changing. Aspiration became quieter, more nuanced. Looking back, the rise of America appeared not as a single ascent, but as a series of renewals. Each generation inherited unfinished work, carrying it forward in its own way. The nation continued, not certain, not complete, but present, still adapting, still learning, still shaped by the choices of ordinary people. History remained open, and America moved on, step by thoughtful step, into a future yet unwritten. As the story moved forward, America entered a period shaped by reflection and renewal. The nation had traveled far from its beginnings, carrying with it layers of experience, achievement, conflict, regret, and hope. Each generation added a new chapter, not by erasing the past, but by responding to it. Public life slowed at moments, allowing space for reconsideration. Institutions were questioned not to weaken them, but to understand them more clearly. Democracy revealed itself not as a finished structure, but as a living process, dependent on participation and trust. Education continued to evolve, reaching beyond classrooms into digital spaces. Knowledge became more accessible, yet attention more divided. Learning required intention, patience, and care, qualities often overshadowed by speed.
Economic life adjusted once again. New forms of work emerged alongside traditional ones. Flexibility increased, but so did uncertainty. Americans debated how to balance innovation with security, progress with protection. Across communities, conversations about belonging deepened. The nation's diversity, long present, became more visible and more openly discussed. Differences were not always easy, but they shaped a broader understanding of what it meant to be American. Moments of shared challenge reminded the country of its interdependence. During times of crisis, people discovered that strength often appeared quietly, in cooperation, empathy, and patience, rather than force. Technology continued to shape perception. Algorithms guided attention. Virtual spaces influenced identity. The question of how to remain human in an increasingly digital world grew more important with each passing year. Internationally, America adjusted to a multipolar world. Leadership now meant listening as well as guiding. Influence depended not only on power, but on credibility and consistency. Looking back across centuries, the rise of America appeared less like a climb toward dominance and more like an ongoing effort toward balance between freedom and responsibility, individuality and community. The nation stood not at an end, but at a crossroads that appeared again and again throughout history. Each time, the path forward depended on choice. Quiet, collective choice. History remained patient, and America continued onward, shaped not only by its past, but by the care with which it approached the future. With time, America learned to move more thoughtfully. The urgency that once defined its rise softened into awareness. The nation had discovered that endurance required not constant motion, but moments of stillness, spaces where reflection could guide action. Communities continued to shape the national story from the ground up. Local efforts, schools, libraries, small businesses, neighborhood gatherings formed the quiet framework of everyday democracy. These ordinary places carried extraordinary importance. The meaning of leadership evolved. Authority alone was no longer enough. Trust, transparency, and accountability became central expectations. Citizens watched closely, questioned openly, and participated more visibly than before. Media and communication transformed yet again. Stories spread instantly, crossing borders and time zones. While this created connection, it also demanded discernment. Truth required patience in a world that rewarded speed. Economic life adjusted to global rhythms. Supply chains stretched across continents. Decisions made far away shaped local realities. America learned that independence now existed alongside interdependence. Environmental awareness deepened. Landscapes long taken for granted revealed their limits. Conservation, once a quiet concern, grew into a shared responsibility. Stewardship became part of the national conversation. Cultural expression reflected complexity. Art explored memory and possibility. Music blended traditions. Stories expanded to include voices once unheard. Creativity became a bridge between past and future. In education, emphasis shifted toward adaptability and lifelong learning. The future demanded not just knowledge, but curiosity, the ability to grow alongside change. Internationally, America navigated influence with greater humility. Cooperation replaced dominance in many spaces. Progress emerged through dialogue rather than declaration. Looking across its long arc, the rise of America revealed a pattern of renewal. When certainty faded, reflection followed. When division surfaced, conversation slowly emerged. The nation continued not because it avoided difficulty, but because it engaged with it, quietly, persistently.
with care. History flowed onward, unbroken, and America moved with it, still learning, still shaping, still becoming. As the journey continued, America entered a quieter phase, one less defined by dramatic turning points and more by steady adjustment. The nation had learned that history did not always announce itself with noise. Often it unfolded gently through small decisions repeated over time. Daily life reflected this subtle transformation. People balanced tradition with innovation, memory with anticipation. The past was no longer something to escape or glorify, but something to understand. Reflection became a form of progress. Communities invested in resilience. Cities reimagined public spaces. Rural regions adapted with patience and ingenuity. Across the country, Americans discovered that renewal often began locally, shaped by shared needs rather than grand design. The economy continued to evolve. Technology increased efficiency, yet also prompted reflection on purpose. Work was no longer only a means of survival, but a question of meaning. Discussions about balance, rest, and dignity gained quiet strength. Education emphasized critical thinking and empathy alongside skill. Learning became less about certainty and more about curiosity, preparing minds not for fixed outcomes, but for continuous change. The nation's relationship with nature deepened. Awareness of climate and environment fostered new approaches to stewardship. Protection and sustainability became shared responsibilities woven into long-term planning. Civic engagement matured. Participation took many forms: voting, dialogue, service, and listening. Democracy revealed itself as a practice, renewed each day through attention and care. Globally, America operated within a complex web of relationships. Influence flowed through cooperation, trade, and shared challenges. Leadership meant consistency rather than dominance. Culturally, storytelling expanded. History was revisited through new perspectives, allowing a fuller picture to emerge. Memory became inclusive, offering space for reconciliation. The rise of America, viewed from this distance, appeared less like a climb toward power and more like a long movement toward understanding. Not louder, not faster, but deeper. History continued its steady rhythm, and America moved within it, patient, reflective, and still becoming. Time carried America forward with a gentler pace. The nation, seasoned by centuries of change, learned to listen more closely to the quiet moments between events. These moments, often overlooked, revealed how deeply the country had matured. Public conversations softened in some places, deepened in others. There was growing recognition that progress did not always arrive through forceful movement, but through understanding shaped over time. Patience became a form of strength. Local communities continued to serve as anchors. Farmers adapted to shifting climates. Educators guided new generations through uncertainty with care. Small businesses reflected resilience, creativity, and trust. These daily efforts sustained the nation more reliably than grand declarations. Technology settled into everyday life. What once felt disruptive became routine. Attention turned from invention itself to its impact on well-being, connection, and meaning. Americans began asking not only what could be done, but what should be done. Economic discussions evolved. Success was measured less by speed and more by stability. Concepts of sustainability, fairness, and long-term responsibility gained influence. the idea of growth expanded beyond numbers into quality of life. Civic life found renewed balance. Engagement was no longer constant reaction, but thoughtful participation. Listening regained importance. Dialogue became a practice rather than a contest. Cultural memory continued to widen. Stories once absent from textbooks found space in public awareness. This expansion did not weaken the national narrative. It strengthened it by adding depth and honesty. America's global presence reflected maturity. Cooperation replaced urgency in many arenas. The nation understood that leadership in the modern world required consistency, humility, and reliability. Looking across its long history, the rise of America appeared less like a destination reached and more like a path continually chosen. Chosen through care, through attention, through the willingness to learn. History moved forward, calm and steady, and America moved with it, rooted, reflective, and quietly enduring. As the story reached this stage, America stood not at a conclusion, but at a place of awareness. The nation had learned, over time, that endurance did not depend on constant triumph, but on reflection, correction, and care. The rhythm of life continued quietly. Families adapted to new realities while holding on to familiar rituals. Work changed form, yet purpose remained rooted in contribution. Communities found strength in cooperation rather than certainty. Public trust, once strained, became a subject of careful rebuilding. Institutions adjusted through transparency and accountability. Democracy, imperfect and resilient, continued as a shared responsibility rather than a fixed guarantee. Education emphasized not only skill, but understanding. Students were encouraged to ask deeper questions, to consider history not as distant memory, but as living influence. Learning became a bridge between generations. Technology, now fully woven into daily existence, invited reflection rather than awe. The nation began to focus less on innovation itself and more on intention, how tools could serve humanity rather than distract from it. Economic life matured. Conversations centered on balance between growth and sustainability, ambition and well-being. Prosperity was increasingly measured by stability, health, and opportunity. Cultural expression remained a quiet guide. Art, literature, and music offered spaces for reflection, helping the nation process complexity without urgency. Creativity continued to soften division and deepen understanding. Internationally, America operated within a shared global framework. Leadership emerged through consistency and cooperation. Influence rested not on dominance, but on trust earned over time. Looking across its long journey, the rise of America appeared not as a completed ascent, but as a continuing practice. Each generation inherited unfinished work, shaped by choice rather than fate. The nation remained present, attentive, open to revision. History flowed onward without pause, and America moved with it, steady, reflective, and still becoming. The passage of time carried America into another quiet phase of awareness. The nation had learned that history was not only shaped by moments of crisis, but by the calm spaces between them, where values were practiced daily without attention. Across the country, life unfolded with measured rhythm. People adapted to change while preserving connection. Traditions evolved gently, retaining meaning even as form shifted. Continuity did not require sameness, it required care. Civic responsibility took on a quieter tone. Participation became thoughtful rather than reactive. Listening regained its place beside speaking. The strength of democracy revealed itself not in volume, but in patience. Education expanded its purpose. Beyond preparation for work, it became a space for perspective, teaching history as context, science as stewardship, and citizenship as shared obligation. Learning connected past choices to future consequences. Economic conversations reflected maturity. Efficiency remained important, but sustainability guided planning. Long-term thinking replaced urgency. Communities invested in resilience rather than speed. Technology, once disruptive, settled into balance. Boundaries were drawn intentionally. Digital tools served connection without replacing presence. The nation learned to slow its gaze. Cultural expression continued to deepen understanding. Stories emphasized empathy over certainty. Art offered rest as much as insight. Memory and imagination worked together to guide reflection. Globally, America engaged as a partner rather than a director. Cooperation strengthened influence more reliably than assertion. Leadership emerged through reliability and respect. The rise of America, viewed through this lens, appeared not as dominance achieved, but as responsibility accepted. Power carried meaning only when guided by restraint. The nation remained attentive, grounded, open to learning. History flowed forward, calm and unbroken, and America continued with it, steady, reflective, and quietly enduring.
As the narrative carried onward, America settled into a season defined by intention. The nation had learned that movement alone did not guarantee progress. Direction mattered. Purpose mattered. And so attention turned toward alignment between ideals and action. Daily life reflected this quieter focus. People sought meaning in routines once taken for granted. Work was approached with consideration for balance. Rest regained value. The pace of living slowed in small but deliberate ways. Communities strengthened their local ties. Public spaces became places of gathering and dialogue. Libraries, parks, and shared institutions served as anchors of connection. These places reminded citizens that democracy lived not only in grand halls, but in ordinary encounters. Education continued to evolve toward depth rather than breadth. Critical thinking, ethics, and empathy became central goals. Students were encouraged to see themselves not as isolated individuals, but as participants in a long civic story. Economic planning reflected patience. Short-term gains gave way to long-term resilience. Investment favored sustainability, adaptability, and care for future generations. Prosperity was redefined as continuity rather than excess. Technology was approached with discernment. Innovation continued, but its adoption was guided by reflection. The question shifted from what was possible to what was beneficial. Tools became servants rather than drivers. Cultural life flourished in subtle ways. Creativity offered comfort and clarity. Stories explored shared humanity rather than division. Art became a space for rest, reflection, and renewal. Internationally, America navigated complexity with steadiness. Relationships were maintained through dialogue and consistency. Influence emerged through trust earned slowly over time. Looking back across centuries, the rise of America appeared as an ongoing act of choice, renewed each day through attention, responsibility, and care. The nation remained present, measured, thoughtful. History continued its gentle flow,
and America moved with it, aware, intentional, and still becoming.
The journey moved forward with a sense of quiet continuity. America had reached a point where its greatest changes were no longer sudden, but gradual, shaped by attention rather than urgency. The nation learned to value steadiness as a form of strength. Daily life reflected this balance. People blended innovation with tradition, choosing thoughtfully which parts of the past to carry forward. Familiar rituals, shared meals, community events, simple routines became sources of grounding in a rapidly shifting world. Civic life matured further. Participation was guided by care instead of reaction. Many discovered that lasting progress emerged from consistency, showing up, listening, and remaining engaged even when outcomes were slow. Education deepened its role as a lifelong process. Learning extended beyond formal institutions into conversation, experience, and reflection. History was revisited not to assign blame, but to gain clarity. Understanding became a shared responsibility. Economic systems continued to adjust. Innovation remained active, yet was guided by long-term thinking. Communities invested in durability, local enterprise, sustainable resources, and skills that could adapt across generations. Technology found a calmer rhythm. Digital tools supported connection without overwhelming presence. Boundaries were respected. Silence regained value alongside information. Cultural expression offered quiet guidance. Stories highlighted resilience rather than spectacle. Music, literature, and art created spaces for rest and contemplation, reminding the nation that meaning often emerged in stillness. On the global stage, America maintained its influence through reliability. Partnerships were sustained through trust built over time. Leadership became less about direction and more about example. Seen across its full arc, the rise of America appeared as a long exercise in learning when to move, when to pause, and when to listen. The nation remained attentive, grounded in experience, open to renewal. History continued gently, and America moved with it, steady, reflective, and quietly enduring. As the narrative continued, America moved with a sense of quiet steadiness. The nation had grown accustomed to change, understanding now that transformation did not always announce itself. Often it arrived softly through choices made day after day. Across towns and cities, people invested more deeply in place. Neighborhoods became centers of care. Local voices mattered. Solutions were shaped not only by policy, but by understanding the unique needs of each community. Civic trust, once fragile, was rebuilt slowly through consistency. Institutions learned that credibility required humility. Leadership became less about direction and more about service. Listening gained value equal to decision-making. Education emphasized context and connection. Students were encouraged to see history as a living thread, linking past effort to present responsibility. Learning became an act of participation in a shared story. Economic life reflected renewed balance. Innovation continued, but with attention to impact. Businesses measured success not only in growth, but in contribution. Stability and care became markers of progress. Technology remained present yet restrained. Digital spaces supported collaboration without overwhelming reflection. The nation learned to protect attention as a public resource. Cultural life offered calm reassurance. Art and storytelling favored honesty over spectacle. Shared narratives helped bridge difference, reminding citizens of common ground beneath diversity. On the global stage, America practiced steadiness. Relationships were sustained through reliability and mutual respect. Influence grew quietly, shaped by example rather than force. Viewed across its long arc, the rise of America revealed itself as a continuous act of adjustment, learning to align ideals with practice, ambition with responsibility. The nation did not rush. It attended. It adjusted. History continued its gentle course, and America moved with it, aware, grounded, and still becoming. The story moved onward with a sense of gentle continuity. America, shaped by centuries of experience, had learned to value endurance over urgency. The nation understood now that lasting strength was often quiet, built patiently through care and consistency. Daily life reflected this understanding. People found meaning in small, repeated actions, tending homes, supporting neighbors, contributing steadily to shared spaces. Progress appeared not as dramatic change, but as stability maintained over time. Communities deepened their sense of belonging. Local initiatives addressed challenges with creativity and cooperation. Trust grew slowly, reinforced by presence rather than promise. Democracy lived most fully in these everyday acts. Education emphasized wisdom alongside knowledge. Learning became a lifelong process, guided by curiosity and reflection. History was approached with honesty, allowing complexity without fear. Understanding replaced certainty. Economic life matured further. Innovation continued, but with attention to consequence. Growth was measured against sustainability, and success increasingly defined by resilience and fairness. The future was planned with care. Technology remained integrated, yet restrained. Tools served connection without demanding constant attention. Space was preserved for silence, thought, and rest. Cultural expression offered comfort and clarity. Art and storytelling reflected shared humanity, inviting empathy rather than division. Creativity became a gentle guide through uncertainty. Internationally, America maintained influence through steadiness. Partnerships endured through reliability and respect. Leadership emerged through example rather than assertion. Seen across its long arc, the rise of America appeared as a continuous practice of listening, adapting, and choosing thoughtfully. The nation remained present, patient, open to renewal. History flowed onward without urgency, and America moved with it, quietly enduring, still learning, still becoming. The passage of years brought America into another season of quiet continuity. The nation no longer measured itself by moments of dominance or display, but by its ability to sustain care through ordinary time. Strength revealed itself in patience. Life unfolded gently across the landscape. Mornings arrived with familiar routines. Evenings settled into reflection. In these repeated patterns, people found reassurance, a sense that stability itself was an achievement. Communities focused on presence. Listening circles, shared spaces, and local projects reinforced trust. Problems were addressed with cooperation rather than urgency. Solutions grew slowly, shaped by understanding rather than haste. Education emphasized discernment. Students learned not only how to analyze information, but how to sit with uncertainty. Curiosity replaced fear. Learning became a practice of attention. Economic systems continued to refine balance. Work adapted to changing realities while preserving dignity. Security and flexibility were no longer seen as opposites, but as partners in a resilient society. Technology remained a quiet companion. It supported daily needs without dominating awareness. The nation learned to protect focus, allowing room for contemplation and rest. Cultural life reflected calm depth. Stories honored perseverance. Music and art invited stillness. Creativity softened division by reminding people of shared emotion and experience. On the global stage, America maintained steadiness. Agreements were honored, dialogue replaced assertion, influence rested on reliability earned through time. Viewed from this distance, the rise of America appeared less like a peak and more like a steady horizon, always present, always guiding, never fully reached. The nation did not hurry. It remained attentive, grounded in care. History flowed forward, calm and continuous, and America moved with it, quietly enduring, still learning, still becoming. Time continued its unhurried movement, and America carried forward with a quiet sense of awareness. The nation had learned that progress was not a destination to be reached, but a relationship to be maintained, one shaped by care, balance, and reflection. Across the country, people grew more attentive to rhythm. Work and rest found gentler harmony. The value of pause became widely understood, not as absence of effort, but as preparation for thoughtful action. Communities strengthened their bonds through shared responsibility. Local voices guided decisions. Challenges were met with patience, allowing solutions to grow organically. Trust deepened where consistency replaced urgency. Education emphasized reflection alongside achievement. Students were encouraged to ask not only how things worked, but why they mattered. Learning became an invitation to see beyond immediate outcomes and toward lasting understanding. Economic life reflected steadiness. Innovation continued, yet its pace aligned with responsibility. Systems were designed to endure change rather than chase it. Security and adaptability were held together. Technology remained present but restrained. Digital spaces supported communication without replacing presence. The nation learned to step back, protecting attention and clarity. Cultural expression offered gentle guidance. Stories explored patience, resilience, and shared humanity. Art became a quiet companion, reminding people that meaning often lived in stillness. Internationally, America engaged with humility. Partnerships were sustained through reliability and respect. Influence emerged through example rather than command. Seen across centuries, the rise of America revealed itself as an ongoing act of care, renewed through attention, restraint, and thoughtful choice. The nation remained steady, open to learning, grounded in experience. History continued its calm unfolding, and America moved with it, reflective, resilient, and still becoming. As the years flowed onward, America entered a phase defined by quiet attentiveness. The nation had come to understand that awareness itself was a form of progress. By noticing small shifts in behavior, in values, in daily life, it learned to guide change gently rather than force it. Life across the land moved with softened urgency. People learned to measure success not only by achievement, but by well-being. Time spent together gained renewed importance. Shared meals, unhurried conversations, and moments of rest became foundations of balance. Communities leaned into cooperation. Differences were approached with curiosity instead of fear. Local solutions emerged through dialogue, shaped by the lived experience of those involved. Trust grew where patience was practiced. Education embraced perspective. Learning encouraged students to connect disciplines, to see relationships between history, science, culture, and ethics. Knowledge became a bridge rather than a boundary. Economic systems continued their slow refinement. Productivity remained valued, yet harmony with environment and society guided decisions. Long-term resilience replaced short-term urgency as a measure of success. Technology found its place as a supportive presence. Tools were chosen deliberately. Silence and focus were protected, allowing thought to deepen and creativity to breathe. Cultural expression offered calm reflection. Stories highlighted shared emotion and quiet courage. Music and art softened division, reminding people of common humanity beneath difference. On the global stage, America practiced steadiness. Relationships were nurtured through consistency and mutual understanding. Influence arose naturally from reliability and respect. Seen from afar, the rise of America appeared not as a singular ascent, but as a long, careful walk, guided by awareness, patience, and responsibility. The nation remained attentive, measured, open to change. History continued its gentle rhythm, and America moved with it, calm, reflective, and still becoming. The flow of history carried America forward with a sense of quiet continuity. The nation had learned that endurance was shaped less by moments of intensity and more by the steady care applied between them. Progress lived in attention. Daily life unfolded with gentle rhythm. People found comfort in consistency, morning light through familiar windows, shared routines, and the quiet assurance of belonging. These ordinary moments formed the true foundation of stability. Communities deepened their commitment to cooperation. Differences were acknowledged without urgency to resolve them. Dialogue replaced reaction. Understanding grew slowly, shaped by listening rather than insistence. Education emphasized connection across generations. Stories of the past were shared not as distant events, but as lived experience carried forward. Learning became a bridge between memory and responsibility. Economic life reflected restraint and balance. Innovation continued thoughtfully, guided by long-term vision. Systems were designed to endure change rather than be driven by it. Resilience became a shared goal. Technology remained present but unobtrusive. Tools served human need without demanding constant attention. Space was preserved for reflection, allowing clarity to return. Cultural expression offered reassurance. Art and storytelling honored patience, humility, and shared emotion. Creativity softened the edges of division, reminding people of common ground. Internationally, America moved with steadiness. Partnerships were maintained through trust and consistency. Influence grew through reliability rather than force. Viewed across its long arc, the rise of America appeared as a sustained practice of care, adaptation, and thoughtful choice. The nation remained calm, attentive, grounded in experience. History continued its gentle unfolding, and America moved with it, steady, reflective, and still becoming. Time moved onward, unhurried, and America followed with a sense of settled awareness. The nation had grown comfortable with continuity, understanding that stability was not stagnation, but a living process sustained through care. Across the landscape, people paid closer attention to what endured. Relationships, trust, and shared responsibility became central measures of progress. Achievement was no longer hurried, it was shaped with intention. Communities strengthened through consistency. Familiar gatherings, shared projects, and collective memory reinforced belonging. Challenges were approached with patience, allowing solutions to mature rather than be forced. Education continued its quiet transformation. Learning emphasized understanding over accumulation. Students were guided to see patterns across time, recognizing how past decisions shaped present possibilities. Knowledge became context rather than control. Economic life reflected moderation. Innovation proceeded with responsibility, mindful of consequence. Growth was evaluated not only by scale, but by sustainability and fairness. Resilience became a common language. Technology remained supportive yet restrained. Digital tools served connection without overwhelming presence. Space for thought, silence, and rest was preserved as a public good. Cultural expression offered steady reassurance. Stories highlighted perseverance and shared humanity. Art invited contemplation, reminding people that meaning often emerged slowly. On the global stage, America maintained steadiness. Relationships were honored through reliability and mutual respect. Influence arose through consistency rather than assertion. Seen across its long unfolding, the rise of America appeared as an ongoing practice, choosing care over urgency, reflection over reaction. The nation remained attentive, balanced, open to learning. History continued its gentle rhythm, and America moved with it, calm, enduring, and still becoming. The long current of history carried America forward into another quiet chapter. The nation had learned to move without urgency, trusting that careful attention could guide it more reliably than speed. Progress was now understood as continuity shaped with intention. Daily life reflected this calm awareness. People placed value on presence, on being fully engaged in moments once overlooked. Conversations slowed, listening deepened. The simple act of noticing became a form of care. Communities strengthened through steadiness. Local traditions were preserved not out of nostalgia, but because they created trust. Shared responsibility bound neighbors together, reinforcing the understanding that lasting change began close to home. Education continued to emphasize depth. Students explored ideas slowly, allowing understanding to settle. History was approached as guidance rather than judgment. Learning became an invitation to participate thoughtfully in the ongoing story. Economic systems matured through balance. Innovation remained, but was guided by foresight. Decisions accounted for consequence, valuing durability over acceleration. Stability became a collective achievement. Technology held its place quietly. Digital tools supported communication without erasing presence. The nation learned to step back when needed, protecting attention as a shared resource. Cultural expression offered gentle clarity. Stories reflected patience and resilience. Art created spaces for rest, helping people process complexity without pressure. On the global stage, America practiced consistency. Agreements were honored, dialogue remained open, influence emerged from reliability earned across time. Viewed across its unfolding arc, the rise of America appeared less as a climb and more as a careful walk, guided by awareness, restraint, and care. The nation remained steady, attentive, grounded in experience. History continued its calm movement, and America moved with it, reflective, resilient, and still becoming. The quiet movement of time carried America into another measured moment. The nation had learned that wisdom often arrived gradually, shaped by reflection rather than force. Change, when guided gently, became lasting. Daily life unfolded with deliberate calm. People paid closer attention to balance between effort and rest, ambition and contentment. The value of stillness was rediscovered, not as retreat, but as renewal. Communities continued to grow through consistency. Trust was reinforced by presence and follow-through. Challenges were approached thoughtfully, allowing solutions to emerge through cooperation rather than haste. Education deepened its role as a guide for perspective. Learning encouraged patience, curiosity, and humility. History was studied as a source of insight, reminding each generation that progress required care. Economic life reflected restraint and foresight. Innovation remained steady, yet guided by responsibility. Systems were designed to endure uncertainty, prioritizing stability alongside opportunity. Technology remained supportive without dominating awareness. Digital tools served communication and creativity while respecting the need for focus and rest. Attention was treated as something to be protected. Cultural expression offered quiet strength. Stories honored perseverance and empathy. Art and music created spaces for reflection, helping people navigate complexity with calm understanding. On the global stage, America maintained steady engagement. Partnerships were nurtured through reliability and mutual respect. Influence continued to arise from trust earned over time. Viewed across its long journey, the rise of America appeared as an evolving balance between motion and pause, ambition and care. The nation remained present, measured, open to learning. History flowed onward, gentle and continuous, and America moved with it, calm, attentive, and still becoming. The long narrative continued with a sense of settled clarity. America moved forward without haste, guided by lessons learned slowly over generations. The nation understood that endurance was sustained not by momentum alone, but by thoughtful care. Everyday life reflected this understanding. People chose presence over speed, depth over distraction. Simple routines, walking familiar paths, sharing quiet meals, tending local spaces, became acts of grounding in a changing world. Communities remained the steady heart of progress. Decisions were shaped close to home, informed by lived experience. Trust grew where consistency replaced promises and cooperation replaced urgency. Education emphasized discernment and patience. Students were encouraged to linger with questions, to value understanding more than immediate answers. History offered context, helping each generation recognize its place within a longer story. Economic systems continued their careful adjustment. Innovation remained thoughtful, aligned with long-term resilience. Work was approached with dignity, balancing productivity with well-being. Technology stayed present yet unobtrusive. Digital tools supported connection without overwhelming attention. Silence and reflection were protected as necessary spaces for clarity. Cultural expression provided quiet guidance. Stories highlighted perseverance and shared humanity. Art offered rest, allowing complexity to be held gently rather than resolved quickly. On the global stage, America engaged with steadiness. Partnerships endured through reliability and respect. Influence emerged naturally from trust built over time. Seen across its unfolding arc, the rise of America appeared as a continuous practice, choosing balance, care, and reflection again and again. The nation remained attentive, grounded, open to renewal. History continued its gentle flow, and America moved with it, calm, resilient, and still becoming. The story carried on with a sense of quiet assurance. America, shaped by long experience, had learned to trust gradual movement. The nation understood that what endured was built slowly through attention given again and again. Daily life reflected this steady awareness. People honored routine as a form of care. Familiar rhythms, morning light, shared work, evening rest, created a gentle structure that supported resilience without urgency. Communities continued to act as anchors. Local dialogue shaped decisions. Responsibility was shared rather than deferred. Trust deepened where presence remained consistent over time. Education emphasized understanding over accumulation. Students were encouraged to connect ideas across history, culture, and science. Learning became a way of seeing relationships, not just gathering facts. Economic life maintained balance. Innovation proceeded thoughtfully, guided by consequence. Systems were shaped to adapt without losing stability, valuing continuity alongside progress. Technology remained supportive but restrained. Digital tools assisted connection while preserving space for focus and reflection. attention was treated with care. Cultural expression offered gentle grounding. Stories explored patience, humility, and shared experience. Art provided quiet moments where complexity could rest without resolution. Internationally, America continued with steadiness. Partnerships endured through reliability and mutual respect. Influence grew from consistency rather than force. Viewed across its long unfolding, the rise of America appeared as a sustained practice of listening, adjusting, and choosing thoughtfully. The nation remained calm, present, open to learning. History continued its slow, even rhythm, and America moved with it, steady, reflective, and still becoming. The gentle current of time carried America onward, without urgency or strain. The nation had learned to trust continuity, understanding that progress often arrived quietly, shaped by steady care rather than sudden change. Across the land, daily life settled into dependable rhythms. People found reassurance in familiar patterns, work completed with intention, rest taken without guilt, and shared moments that strengthened connection. Stability became a source of calm. Communities continued to nurture trust through presence. Local efforts addressed challenges with patience, allowing cooperation to guide solutions. Responsibility was shared, and belonging deepened through consistent care. Education emphasized perspective and humility. Learning encouraged reflection, reminding each generation that understanding grew over time. History offered guidance rather than certainty, shaping thoughtful participation in civic life. Economic life reflected restraint and foresight. Innovation moved steadily, aligned with long-term resilience. Prosperity was measured by security, fairness, and continuity rather than speed. Technology remained integrated yet balanced. Digital tools supported daily needs without demanding constant attention. Space for thought, silence, and focus was preserved as essential. Cultural expression provided quiet reassurance. Stories explored endurance and shared humanity. Art invited contemplation, allowing complexity to rest without pressure for resolution. On the global stage, America maintained steadiness. Relationships were honored through reliability and respect. Influence emerged naturally from consistency and trust. Seen across its long unfolding, the rise of America appeared as an ongoing practice of patience, care, and thoughtful choice. The nation remained attentive, grounded, open to renewal. History continued its calm flow, and America moved with it, steady, reflective, and still becoming.